It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that. At its best, politics is about bringing people into your cause, not turning them away.
Welcome back to America Decides. Does Donald Trump have a Nikki Haley problem? Well, even though Haley has been out of the race for months, she captured nearly 22% of the vote in Tuesday's Indiana Republican primary. And that follows other primaries in which she has received a significant share of the vote. So let's bring in our political panel, Joel Payne and Olivia Perez-Cubas. Joel is CBS News political contributor and a Democratic strategist. And Olivia, timely, served as the spokesperson for Nikki Haley's presidential campaign. Great to see you both. Olivia, I'll start with you, just given those numbers that we've seen there. Does that surprise you that she's still getting this relatively big portion of the vote?
No, it does not surprise me, and this is timely. And look, I think we've seen this in state after state. Nikki continues to get 15, 17, 20, this week in Indiana, 22% of the vote. And I think it is because voters are showing again and again that they are dissatisfied with the choice that they have at the top of the ticket, that they were looking for an alternative. And I think more than anything, the lesson here is that this is a question of what are Biden and what are Trump going to do with this information, right? What do the voters, what do they care about? What are they talking about? And at the end of the day, as Nikki just said in the clip that you played, it is up to both candidates to earn the vote of those who support her. And I think whichever candidate works harder to do that will ultimately be the candidate that wins in November.
I mean, Joel, we were just talking to the Biden campaign about the outreach that they're making, but is that realistic that those voters could come over to Biden, or do they stay home?
I think it's realistic that a certain number of those voters are viable for President Biden. You know, as we were talking, just looking at some of the sound that you were teeing up, we were talking about just the importance of coalition building, right? I mean, that's the name of the game here. Really, who is going to be able to put their coalition back together better? Is Trump able to put a 2016-like coalition back together that was winning for him? Or can Biden do a 2020 coalition redux that was a winning coalition for him? And I think the math for Joe Biden suggests that he's going to need a couple of those voters to come over from a Nikki Haley column to at least be open to him. Also important, how many resources do you force the Trump campaign to defend those types of voters that really should be very easily fitting in his coalition? And I think that's another thing that the Biden and Trump campaigns have to consider.
So maybe not necessarily winning them, but at least putting some pressure on the other side in terms of financing.
Force the Trump campaign to spend some resources there.
Olivia, I mean, the big question is whether Nikki Haley is going to endorse in this race. I mean, she said when she bowed out, of course, that Trump would have to earn her vote. Has he done anything to earn her vote so far?
I want to just be clear. I no longer speak for her, and I no longer work for her. And I think the irony of all of this is that not much has changed since she made those comments. I get the intrigue with what's Nikki going to do next, who is she going to endorse, if, when, whatnot. Ultimately, that's a decision that Nikki and only Nikki can make. I think right now she's kind of just enjoying her life. Her husband was serving overseas. He's now back. So, you know, we shall see. I think the bigger question is going back to my first point, which is what are Trump and Biden going to do to earn her voters? Because if we know one thing to be true, you know, it's this race in November is going to be a toss-up. It's going to be a nail-biter. And whomever works to earn the Nikki voter will be the one who wins. So I think the question is more on what are they going to do, not what Nikki's going to do.
Yeah, nail-biter to be sure. I mean, our battleground state polling shows a tied race in pretty much, you know, these three big states. I do want to talk a little bit about some of Trump's latest comments. You know, he's been in the courtroom all week, of course, but he does have the opportunity to come out and speak. And he was offering criticisms of Biden and his decision on weapons to Israel. I want to play a little bit of sound from him and get your thoughts on the other side.
What Biden is doing with respect to Israel is disgraceful. If any Jewish person voted for Joe Biden, they should be ashamed of themselves. He's totally abandoned Israel, and nobody can.
So, Joel, I'll start with you. What do you make of those comments?
Hot political tip, Olivia, you and I should start our own consulting firm right now. Don't shame voters. You shouldn't be shaming voters. If you want to bring someone into your coalition, you're going to have to do more than say what they should do based on your projection of what their worldview should be. And look, I think the president is offering, by the way, a version of the world that I'd imagine there are some Nikki Haley voters agree with, that they might disagree with what President Biden did over the last few days. I can tell you, on Biden's side, he did a lot of work to start to mend some fences within his progressive coalition. A lot of progressive groups who were really disappointed with how President Biden has, I think they feel like, been unbalanced in his administration of the situation in Gaza. I think they feel a lot better over the last 24, 36 hours than they did previously, based on the fact that the president is actually showing some ability to use some leverage to pressure Bibi Netanyahu.
So that's interesting, too, because as you both know, I mean, everywhere, there are protests everywhere. But also, you know, I was covering Harris last week when she was in Florida covering abortion, and there were protests outside the event. So as much as the Biden campaign wants to turn the page, they are faced with these protests over and over again. Olivia, I'm curious what you make of the former president's comments there. Do you agree with Joel?
I think this is a typical case of Trump getting in his own way and being his own worst enemy. I think that, you know, Biden's recent actions toward Israel, like criticism there, could be warranted. And I think a lot of voters, not just Republican, but moderate, middle of the road voters, want to see America stand with our ally Israel. Obviously, I do not condone his comments there. I think, you know, broadly speaking, like, the temperature is way up in this country, and we've got to turn it down. This kind of divisive rhetoric is not helpful. And to your point, voters don't want to be told what to think, how to live, how to vote. And this is not helpful, ultimately.
Basic campaign advice from two pros. Thank you very much,
You're
Joel and
welcome.
Olivia, for being here. We appreciate it.